Hey all, here OS Reviews. In this video we're doing a quick comparison and review between the Luoran M4 Pro, their newest player, as well as the previous M4S. So both of these are budget Android DAPs running on the same operating system that you may see on your smartphone, but keep in mind that these are going to be more budget conscious options, usually selling in around $50 to $60 price range. The M4S is the cheaper option compared to the newer M4 Pro, which is about $15 more. So this is not going to be a direct competitor to the Sony Walkmans of the world, which are going to be more expensive, more flagship in terms of their DACs and components inside, whereas these are a bit more bare bones. They're designed as kind of a backup player if you don't want to spend an arm or a leg, and you still want to add a traditional 3.5mm headphone jack, which might be missing on modern day smartphones, or perhaps if you're using it in a work environment, it doesn't allow you to use your phone with cellular signal, you can consider this, or of course give it to a child as a kid's music player, so tempering those expectations based on the price point here. So starting with the specs, the M4 Pro upgrades to an Octa-core MediaTek based processor compared to the quad-core chip that was used on the M4S. It handles the basics for music playback and streaming well enough, and obviously an octa-core processor will just feel a little bit more snappy and responsive. However, the overall size and form factor as well as design are honestly quite similar, and that's because both are touting 4-inch IPS LCD touchscreen displays, in fact almost looking identical from afar. Also, in terms of packaging contents, both of these players come with a protective TPU case in the box, as well as the same accessories, inclusive of a standard USB Type-C to Type-A charging cable, as well as a pair of included bundled 3.5mm headphones. But again, the quality of these headphones are quite basic, and I would honestly recommend plugging in your own pair for slightly higher quality audio, but it's there if you need to use it in a pinch. And both of the cases, by the way, do also include a lanyard strap if you want to attach a keychain onto them. Now taking a closer look at the I/O here, on the bottom of both players we have the same placement of the headphone jack, Type-C there for data transfer as well as charging, and we have a single loudspeaker built on in. Then located on the right hand spine there's access to the volume rocker as well as power keys. We can see that on the previous generation M4S they were actually using a single connected volume rocker, versus on the Pro they've detached it into two separate buttons, but functionality is the same. We also have the micro SD card slot on the Pro on the side compared to on the S, it was actually on the other end. Now something interesting is on the default packaging for the M4S, it actually doesn't come with a micro SD card pre-installed in the box, versus the Pro, at least currently, seems to be bundled with a 64GB micro SD card. Now in terms of system storage, there is around 32GB built in, but obviously that's further expandable. It supports micro SD cards up to 1TB. Compared to on the M4S, you have 16 gigs of built-in system storage, so half the amount found on the Pro, and again there is no micro SD card pre-inserted, but you can use your own, although it recognizes slightly smaller cards. Interestingly, on the spec sheet here it states up to 256GB, however on their product page they instead state 512 gigs, and I did test it earlier with a slightly larger card. 512 does seem to be the more current limitation. Now popping off the protective TPU carrying case, we can see that the build quality of these players are really not bad. They have glass on the front and back in addition to a metal chassis on the sides, so it definitely feels a little bit more expensive or premium than I expected, and picking it up has a nice heft and density to it as well. That being said, as 4-inch devices, obviously these are still going to be much more compact compared to the typical smartphones that we're used to in this day and age, making it a little bit easier just to slide into a pocket. So pretty decent fit and finish. All the keys also feel relatively tactile and responsive. They're also crafted out of metal as well. Now taking a closer look here on the front, both of the players also do come with a factory pre-applied screen protector. Now although they're both based on Android, technically the Pro is running on a newer version of the operating system, loosely based on Android 14 compared to Android 9 on the M4S, so definitely more outdated in terms of the OS level. But keep in mind that these are still designed primarily just for music listening, especially if you're playing local files from an SD card. I don't think that's going to matter quite as much, but yeah, it's nice to have a little bit more future proofing on the M4 Pro. And both players come with the standard Wi-Fi as well as Bluetooth connectivity options, and both have the same 2000 mAh capacity battery underneath. Now, interestingly, although the display quality is honestly, I think, the same when it comes to resolution, as well as both are being fully laminated on the display, there is no air gap between the glass and the display underneath, so pretty much the same in terms of contrast and quality. However, you can see that on the older M4S, it looks like there's a slightly larger chin at the bottom versus a slightly smaller forehead, versus the Pro being a little bit more symmetrical on the top and bottom, being even. Otherwise, both of these players will support pretty much the same file formats as, again, Android-based DAPs. It's not too surprising. For example, the typical MP3, FLAC for lossless resolution tracks, WAV, so on and so forth, and it does come with FM radio support on both players as well. So you can plug in a pair of headphones to act as the antenna. Now, what's similar across both players, it's lacking any camera, for example, like some of the previous iPod Touches, so just keep that in mind. It really is just designed exclusively for music listening, not for communication, and also not having any biometric fingerprint scanner, though you can set up a password or PIN to unlock it if you want some extra security. However, both of these devices do have built-in Bluetooth, so if you want to connect to wireless Bluetooth headphones, that is possible. Now, the launcher experience does look quite similar, although again, some of the elements in the Android UI compared to Android 9, Android 14 are going to look a little bit different here, such as the notification drag down drawer, definitely a little more retro looking on the M4S versus the Pro, providing some additional accessibility functions, including dimming the screen, as well as screen recording just at a single click. Otherwise, to Luoran's credit, I will say that the general navigation experience, at least across the UI, seems to be decent enough. It doesn't feel overly choppy or slow on both devices, despite more entry-level hardware. And swiping down, we can find the aforementioned security unlock options, as well as the scheduled power on and off mode. So for example, if you're not using the player at night or certain days of the week, you can have it automatically turn off to consume less power and then turn on again when you're using it. And we're also able to verify the version of Android that they're running in under advanced system settings as well. So it seems to be mostly as advertised. For S over here, you can see by default, it's going to revert to these virtual on-screen buttons and doesn't really give you the option to use gesture navigation mode, which I guess doesn't matter that much. The keys themselves are pretty easy to hit and navigate around, although it is a bit more of a traditional layout. Compared to on the Pro, you have the option to use virtual keys or gesture mode, which we've activated over here, so you can swipe up instead to navigate around, perhaps feeling a little bit more modern, but that's probably also because of the more limited hardware specs on the M4S, so they've used less animations, disabling the gesture mode on this particular device. Otherwise, a slightly newer processor on the Pro likely has a smaller transistor size as well, so despite having more cores, it seems to be a touch more energy efficient. Right now we're at a same max brightness level for the displays, but although both devices started off the same number, we can see that the 4S has dropped by 1 or 2% more compared to the Pro. And so although both devices can generally last around 3 days of casual use if you're offline, only listening to stored music, if you are connected to Wi-Fi, I would say the Pro might be slightly better when it comes to power endurance. It gets closer to maybe 1 day of use before you have to recharge it, compared to on the older 4S, likely needing a top-up if you're using it for hours and hours with Wi-Fi on. So just keep that in mind. As far as installed applications are concerned, I have to say they are quite similar across these devices. You can find Spotify, Libby as some built-in applications, and they have installed their launcher on top of Android, so it doesn't give you the traditional kind of app drawer experience, even if you're long holding. However, on the Pro, I will say it comes preloaded with a couple more apps. For example, I am seeing the Google Play Store on here compared to on the 4S, seems to not come with the Google Play Store pre-installed. Now, of course, they can still install other Android apps just as APKs that you download yourself using the browser or drag over from a computer, but it's nice to have the official Google Play Store support on the Pro and a couple more preloaded apps. For example, YouTube is on here, which is missing on the M4S. Instead, you can jump into Chrome to watch YouTube videos from the browser, in addition to having Apple Music streaming on here as well, which is a built-in app that's not found on here, but you can add that yourself if needed. Now, dimming the lights a little bit more, you can also see the viewing angles of these displays are, generally speaking, not bad for IPS LCD panels, not a lot of light bleeding either for a budget device. Now, in terms of the music player experience, they are using the Hybe app by default, which supports a pretty wide selection of, again, file formats, a decent enough layout as well. So we can tap here to enter, and it will be able to recognize different files inside of the SD card or in the built-in storage. Tapping on a track also allows us to check out the cover art information if available, as well as a generally attractive enough UI for scrubbing between parts of the clip, in addition to accessing a queue here on the side for jumping into other tracks in your playlist or album. Further tapping on the very top also allows us to pull up some equalizer options, so you can adjust the frequency sliders yourself, including amplifying the volume output, which I found was generally satisfactory on both of these players. Honestly, when it comes to audio quality itself, I don't feel like there's a massive difference between the two. It's a similar class to existing smartphones on the market, not necessarily a custom DAC or the highest component there being used for the digital to analog conversion, but still the analog headphone jack was clean. I didn't really encounter any traces of static or distortion when plugging in headphones, as well as offering generally good volume level output as well. I would say navigating around also doesn't feel extremely sluggish even on the M4S. Honestly, it did fine. Maybe you'll see a couple of moments of dropped frames. You have to wait a split second for some of the apps to open, but once they do, performance has been decent, surprisingly. You can also sort by title, folder, album, artist, genre information as a couple of presets and pull up the virtual search bar here as well. So yeah, really not bad for general music playback, and I felt like it was a fairly good experience on both devices considering they are budget DAPs at the end of the day. Now, by the way, the Hybe app also will label high-res tracks as this yellow color. As you can see there, those are some of the FLAC resolution tracks. You can distinguish it from your normal files more easily at a glance. Now, furthermore, you can swipe here on the side to find some additional options for changing the sound to make it cooler versus warmer sounding. The bass can be extended to be more deep versus light. The same thing goes with trebles as well as we scroll up and down. So plenty of granular controls if you're looking for it. This also includes gapless playback options as well, or a fade-in, fade-out effect, depending on your preferences if you're listening to music versus audiobooks, perhaps. Now, something you won't find on both of these players, though, is the ability to use their DACs for anything else, externally that is. You're not able to connect them to your smartphone and use it as a sound card, for example, or use it as an external DAC connecting to a laptop or anything like that. It's only able to be used when you are loading music directly into the player. That's a feature that's often reserved on more expensive digital audio devices or DAPs that we have seen in the past. Otherwise, both of these devices will come with a built-in basic video player, and you are able to also input a URL, for example from YouTube, stream it back from this particular interface compared to the native YouTube app, perhaps even lighter on GPU usage and just being more optimized for lighter hardware. Now, both of these players, interestingly enough, also do come with a ebook reader app, although honestly I think this is not super different from just reading on your phone since they are still LCD screens instead of being e-ink or anything like that, and also a bit more squished in size. But there is a Moon Reader app for text files, Word documents, PDFs if you want to look into that kind of thing, and also this is what the splash screen looks like as it goes to sleep if you're currently playing music there in the background. Further swipe to unlock if you're putting it in your pocket. Now, as far as family link and parental controls are concerned, if you're giving this to a kid, you can actually set up a password, allowing you to manage what types of applications that a child is able to access in this particular mode. For example, only the local music. If you want to disable the web browser, again, using it as a children's music player, certain apps here as well, including Spotify for kids, is also going to be an option that you can toggle on and off. And then we have similar controls here as well, but on the Pro, you have to kind of add an account that is a Google account that you want to supervise on the device, and then similarly be able to control what types of applications your kids are accessing on the players. Now, as far as the utility tools are concerned, honestly, these are going to be quite similar across the two. So there is a basic clock that you can find. In fact, they haven't really updated the app here either. If you're trying to use it as an alarm clock, for example, a timer, stopwatch, pretty simple and straightforward. In addition to a simple sound recorder or voice recorder is also built on in. So here's a quick test of recording audio on the M4 Pro and M4S. How do I sound? Audio on the M4 Pro and M4S. How do I sound? How do I sound? Overall, I would say that the Pro that we heard here first is a little bit louder in terms of the microphone pickup compared to the M4S. They're in the same position, is a bit more quiet, slightly more muffled sounding. But again, you can use it if you're in a pinch for recording any notes or memos. Also, there's going to be a very simple calculator app built in as well, a bit more updated here on the M4 Pro. As you can tell here, you can even choose between light versus dark themes. Now, for organizing files, both of these come with a file manager app that you can just tap over here to access, although it seems to be a little more customized on the older 4S with these icons compared to on the Pro is using the standard kind of Google Files app for you to access the SD card as well as any local files you have on the device. But both do the same things for transferring files. You can also find a wireless file transfer app as well. They're using slightly different apps this time. MiniShare versus this Zappa app allow you to send files over from a phone or a computer as long as they're on the same Wi-Fi network without having to plug in a cable if you prefer this method for some added convenience. So yeah, the functionality is mostly going to be the same across this, and they both have the wireless file transfer option as well. Now, as for the specific built-in streaming applications, whether it's audiobooks or just music, including Amazon Music, Tidal, Spotify, Pandora, all of those services will work just fine on these devices, despite their lower-end hardware, as long as you give it a second longer to open up at the start. Also, the displays, if we see them side by side, seems to have a slightly more yellowish tint on the Pro compared to slightly more whiter on the 4S in certain applications at least, which might be just a difference in the color calibration, but just a minor thing to note. Both look decent though. Now with Wi-Fi turned on, I'm pressing both of these devices a little bit harder when it comes to streaming back audio, watching YouTube, using the browser, things like that. They will get a little bit warmer on the back regions because they are, again, slightly less powerful hardware. I wouldn't say thermal throttling is necessarily as big of a deal here because it's not like you are doing anything crazy like playing back AAA style games. It's still mostly quite basic, so it seems to keep up decently enough, but there is a touch of warmth that creeps up if you're using it a little bit more heavily. Right now, for example, we have a lot of open applications there in the background. Although some of these apps may start to reload as we jump back and forth, we can clear out of that space. Here's also a quick boot up test between the two. Again, the Pro here on the left and the 4S on the right. So the Pro here has fully started, and then about 5 seconds later, we now have the 4S up and running as well. Now moving into a quick YouTube video playback and what the sound quality is like. Pro over here. Alright, so turning the sound there down, overall, again, the screen quality is actually not bad if you want to watch some quick clips. The speaker quality, though, I would say only is so-so. In terms of volume, it gets decently loud for a smaller device, but there's not a lot of bass here. It sounds a little bit more on the tinny side. And overall, I can confirm that the quality on the M4S is exactly the same. They're using the same components for the speaker inside here, so no changes in this regard. But yeah, since the M4S is lacking the official Google Play Store, as well as the YouTube app, you would have to jump into Chrome and watch back the video instead. Compared to the first party app, is a little bit better optimized on the Pro edition over here. Now jumping into the Chrome web browser here, let's also go into a quick web browsing test. And similarly, if you're jumping into a web page, I think we'll see mostly the same result here as well, taking just a beat slower there to completely render a slightly more complex page like The Verge. So if you want slightly snappier performance, you're going to get that on the Pro version, kind of expected. Pinch to zoom though seems to work well enough on both devices for just some casual articles. Let's jump into another page over here, again showing the difference there in speed. We can also jump into the full desktop version of the site here and see how that works on both devices. Again, just loading up a little bit faster on the more powerful octa-core device. Now, as far as some final differences between the two, it's mostly cosmetic. In terms of the color choices, for example, the Pro seems to have slightly more conservative options. It comes in silver as well as a black one that you can pick between, versus the 4S comes in slightly more vibrant blue here, or you can pick for a pink color as well as a more conservative black as well. It's an interesting trend that we've observed that on the more higher end device usually gets more safe color choices compared to the slightly more entry-level models, and we see the same thing here as well. Now, interestingly, their webpage also documents a history of some of their previous offerings. The M4 was their first Android-based app over 4 years ago, and then they released an updated version called the M4B, adding in more parental controls of giving it to a child, and then the M4S is the one that we see over here, further expanding on the capacity, and of course the M4 Pro here finally upgrading on the hardware specs as well, but having incremental bumps in terms of the software experience, going from Android 7 to Android 9 to now Android 14. So there we go. That is more or less it as far as our hands-on review as well as comparison between the Luoran M4S as well as the M4 Pro, their newest model here in 2025. Again, the hardware I wouldn't say is dramatically different, as well as the glass finish and the display itself actually remaining pretty vibrant for a budget device. Sure, it's not going to be the highest PPI in the world, but for just simple music playback, honestly, it seems to be doing a decent enough job. And so although the core experience remains mostly unchanged, this is kind of like a budget or modern-day iPod Touch equivalent without the SIM card or phone capabilities. It's actually not that bad as a entry-level, again, pretty basic MP3 player or DAP designed for music playback. And I would say that in this case, the Pro I do think is a worthwhile upgrade for, again, $10 to $15 more, just because you get a faster processor, better future-proofing in terms of the software experience as well. The newer processor, as well as built-in Google Play Store support, I do think are valuable additions to have, giving you a little bit more versatility. That being said, if you're certain that you're going to only be using this for playing back local music anyways, you're not really accessing any of the streaming features, you're just accessing it from the memory card, then perhaps you can still save a few bucks and get the M4S. But yeah, not bad, and nice to see that there are still incremental improvements being added to these budget devices. So you can check out more details if you're interested in something like this in the links down below, but for now that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been just a closer look at the Luoran M4S as well as the M4 Pro.